Okay, so thank you all for coming. This is a very interdisciplinary meeting, but all the talks interconnect, I hope in interesting ways. I'm going to start with a general talk on this question, what is a capability? And I'll mention again that everything that is said is being recorded, so be very careful what you say. The problem that we face increasingly as computers are being used more and more in all kinds of areas is that computers are stupid, which means that they don't understand that when people use words, they don't always use them in the same ways, and they don't always ask for clarification about the meanings of words. Could the door be locked, Ken? Because somebody just tried it and walked away. And so in a large company, something similar happens. So this is a well-known set of slides illustrating a problem about what happens when you have a project which needs to be realized. So there is how the customer explained the project, how the project leader understood it, and how the programmer wrote it, and how the sales executive described it, how it was documented, how the customer was billed, and so on. And the ideal would be that if we all used words in the same ways when we were describing a project, then the project itself would be, because it's being described consistently, a unitary thing and would be more likely to be realized. So if we have shared meanings, we can cooperate more successfully. And we need shared meanings already if we're going to be working with computers. And that's what ontology is all about. So ontology is the attempt to create shared meanings across different communities and disciplines by using careful definitions with logical structures so that the computer can use the definitions as well as a human being. So the goal is that everyone will use language in the same way when, for instance, launching a project, describing a project, documenting a project, and so on. Now, the first really successful ontology which attempted to solve this problem for biologists is called the gene ontology. And the gene ontology created a way in which biologists and medical researchers could use chemistry data deriving from the Human Genome Project. And what it did was it created a link between huge bodies of chemistry data inside computers and biologists using old-fashioned terms such as cellular component or molecular function or biological process. So the gene ontology has three parts, one of which is a molecular function ontology. And the gene ontology has been used in order to understand the functions of genes. If we know the functions of genes, we can know how they work in the body, and then we can know how they are involved in bringing about, for instance, diseases. And the gene ontology is used by thousands of people. It is a very mature, very huge effort, which is used not just in human biology, but also in biological research on model organisms such as mouse and rat and so on. Now, for the gene ontology, as for biologists in general, I would argue a function is always something good. So there are oncogenes, and what oncogenes do is bring it about that cells, which are normal cells, are transformed into tumor cells. But that is not the function of an oncogene, and biologists would not say that that was the function of the oncogene. They would say that there was a gene which had a certain function, whatever it was, and this gene was mutated, and it was mutated to become an oncogene. And when the oncogene transforms normal cells into tumor cells, it is not realizing a function. There is no function there, because functions are always good things. They are always things which serve survival or reproduction in the biological case. Now, the problem is that biologists often say that the oncogene, when it transforms normal cells into tumor cells, is functioning. And what they mean by that is just in activity. It's operating, it's working, but it's not realizing a function. So we need to be very careful about confusing functions with activities which may or may not be realizations of functions. Now, the word function is used also in medicine to define disease, for instance. So one of the leading philosophers of medicine defines disease as something inside an organism that depresses a functional ability below normal levels. So in other words, a disease is a dysfunction inside an organism. And health, on the other hand, is normal functioning. And we can see here again that we have to understand, if we're going to understand how Bohr understands disease, we have to understand the meanings of the words function and functioning. And unfortunately, he too often talks about functioning to mean activity rather than the realization of a function. All right, now this problem of function and functioning is of central relevance to understanding capability. And unfortunately, we don't have a word for the realization of a capability, which is analogous to the word functioning. So we don't have capabilitying or any similar word. So I'll have to talk all the time about realization of capability. And the reason why this is relevant to the talk of function is because every function is a capability. That's what I want to claim. It's not the case that every capability is a function, but it is the case that every function is a capability. And you can think, so everything I say you can shoot down. And if you shoot this down, my whole talk dies. So think very hard. And if you really think that you have a good counterexample to the thesis that every function is a capability, then you can raise your hand.
What's the capability again?
I haven't told you yet.
That's, yeah,
so. Now, we use the word capability to describe many things. So my digestive system has the function to digest food, and I have the capability to digest food also because I have a digestive system. But I do not have the function to digest food. I am not here to eat. I'm not here to do ontology. I'm not here to make friends. They're all capabilities that I have, but they're not my function. And the function is a capability, which is the reason why an entity exists. So if the function of a screwdriver is to transmit torque to a screw, that's the reason why a screwdriver exists. But a screwdriver may have many capabilities. So a car has many capabilities in addition to its function of transporting people. So now let's answer Bill's question, which is, what does capability mean? Now, there have been various attempts to define capability. And Farhad, in the keynote talk later today, will describe some of those attempts. And one problem with defining capability is that there are many similar sounding words with similar meanings, and people aren't sure about the differences between the meanings of those words. So capability and ability, what's the difference? Is every ability a capability? Well, there are disabilities, and disabilities are precisely not capabilities, and so forth. And then there are other words like adaptability, which are related to the word capability. Potential is another word. And wherever you have capabilities amongst human beings, at least, you have the possibility for things like credentials and qualifications. Human capabilities include expertise. What's the difference between expertise and capability? So all of these are questions which are answered in various ways by various communities. And the result is a spaghetti of different definitions for terms like this, many of which are circular. So people, and Farhad will talk about this in more detail later on, people think that this is a good definition of capability. But of course it's circular, because unless you already know what capacity is, you won't understand what capability is, and capacity is not defined. So what we have at the moment is that different people use the word capability, and other people use the word capacity, and other people use words like ability and so on, and they all mean more or less the same thing, but the relations between all those meanings are not clear because no one ever sits down and works out how to create a consistent set of definitions for terms like this. And so our goal is to create such a consistent set of definitions. That's what we're here for. This is the beginning of a new age, the age of consistent definitions of capability. We already have consistent definitions of words like function, but no one did this yet for capability. Many people, as will become clear from Farhad's talk, did this for specific kinds of capabilities within the manufacturing world, for instance, but no one did it in general. Why do we want to do it in general? Because computers and people are cooperating, and both computers and people have capabilities. All right, so the goal is to choose one general term, and we're going to choose capability, and then define all the other terms non-circularly in terms of capability, so that we have no traps, no circularities. And so a circularity would be where somebody defines disease as absence of health and defines health as absence of disease. That is not a good pair of definitions because both of them are circular. And then we propagate the results of these definitions in various communities where people are concerned to get consistent meanings across different groups, primarily because they're using computers. And an example of such a group would be the group of people engaging in digital manufacturing. All right, now, if you have a capability, then it's something that endures. It may not endure for very long. So you may learn how to play the piano, and then you are suddenly affected by some strange phobia, so that you have a phobia towards music. And so your capability disappears almost as soon as you've acquired it. But it lasts at least for a certain period of time, however short. But when people try to define capability, one mistake that they make is to define capability in terms of actions or activities, or in terms of functionings, as we saw earlier. So if you look at Merriam-Webster's definition of function, then they illustrate the confusion between function and functioning by defining a function as an action. And similarly, when people define capability, then they often confuse capabilities with actions. So there is a website called smartercompanies.com, which attempts to sell to companies the idea that they can help them to harvest what they call their intangible capital. So their tangible capital is things like machines. But the intangible capital, and there are several types of intangible capital, include, this company says, human capital, by which they mean capabilities of your human beings, but they include, under the heading of human capital, experiences. Now, experience is not a capability. Experience is something that happens. It's not something that you have that endures through time. And similarly, they describe capabilities under the heading of relationship or network capital. But a relationship between two people is not a capability. It's only a capability. There is only a capability if those two people operate as a pair or as a partnership, and that partnership is able to bring about certain consequences, such as successful negotiations, which either one of them taken singly without that relationship could not have achieved. All right, so how do we go about standardizing the language of capabilities? Well, the answer is that we turn to the International Standards Organization and the International Electrotechnical Commission, which is always the best place to go if you want to standardize terminology. And so the International Organization for Standardization has a motto, when the world agrees. Ontologically speaking, that's not a very good motto. So the ISO has a committee draft standard for a top-level ontology, which is standard number 21838-1. It's not yet been approved. This standard has not yet been passed through to final vote. But basic formal ontology, which is one example of a top-level ontology, has also been standardized by ISO in ISO standard 21838-2, and this is now a draft international standard, which means it's already been approved. It's already passed its final vote, and it will be published as such just as soon as part 1 is approved. But it exists as a draft international standard, which will be published, we hope, in the course of this year. And basic formal ontology includes definitions for words that we're going to need in order to define capability. So we're going to use basic formal ontology in order to produce a non-circular definition of what a capability is. And so one term in BFO is realizable entity. And a realizable entity is either a role or a disposition. So a role is something like the student role, the lawyer role, the headmaster role, and so on. It's an attribute that someone has that gets realized in certain activities. So the student role is realized in activities of studying and taking examinations and so forth. So every role has a realization process or a set of realization processes. Roles, we say, are externally grounded. That means that they exist because they are awarded or imposed by some external agency, such as a university, for instance. On the other hand, we have dispositions, and dispositions are internally grounded. That is to say, they are a product of the physics of whatever has the disposition. For instance, an organism. So I guess practically all males have the disposition to go bald. They already have this disposition when they're born, even before they're born, presumably. And so that means that dispositions are not always realized. Many dispositions are never realized. So that all sperm have dispositions to penetrate eggs, but most of them never get to realize their disposition. Now, dispositions, roles, functions are all what BFO calls continuants. That just means they continue to exist. They endure through time. And processes, including the realizations of roles and dispositions and functions, are what BFO calls occurrence. So they occur in time. And I've said already, realizables need what be realized, but each realizable is associated with a type of realization. So the disposition to go bald is associated with the type of process which we call losing hair. So dispositions include the disposition of a fruit to ripen, the disposition of a mammal to breathe, the disposition of somebody who's learned Latin to speak Latin, and so on. And now we can define a capability. So BFO provides the definition of disposition. We're going to use that to define capability. A capability is a disposition whose realization brings benefits. And all of the examples I gave earlier, except going bald, bring benefits when realized. And now this is the second point where if you raise your hand and give me an example of a capability which does not satisfy this definition, then I will just have to crawl into a corner. So now is your big chance. Yeah, yeah, there is a price if you get it wrong. You get humiliated. Humiliated. Go on, go on. Give it a go. Give it a shot.
No, so about, I'm thinking about you. So a virus, right, has a function to invade cells and kill it.
So the virus benefits from exercising that capability.
So I
because its community gets bigger, survives, and so forth.
Okay.
Alan?
Toxins are capable of making you sick.
Yes. Okay, that's coming later, but the word capable of is often used in a generalized or metaphorical sense, which does not imply that there is any capability underlying it. And I'll give you more examples later on and explain how I'm going to address that. So I'm still standing. Yes?
Aren't an awful lot of these just context dependent? I mean, so they generate.
We're coming to that. We're coming to that.
Depends on what it's doing.
This is definition 0.1. It's not even definition 1.0.
Barry, what about similar example with the virus with a colony of parasites, for instance, that undermines their own existence through very.
For a while, at least, they benefit.
Okay.
And they benefit from their capability. The problem is that when they go too far, and I'm coming to that. So all of the counterexamples so far raised, I already addressed.
Well, I'm trying to draw the distinction right now between functions and capabilities.
That we're coming to that.
Okay.
All right. Now, then we have to define benefit, of course, but we don't do that. We leave benefit as primitive for the moment. We can say various things about benefits. I think everyone understands, roughly speaking, what benefit means, but it would take too long to define benefit here. But it has to be defined. For the moment, we just leave it as primitive. Roughly speaking, though, you benefit from processes of a certain kind if undergoing those processes means that you're better off than you would have been without that process. Other things being equal, which they very rarely are. Yes?
So we're going to try something here.
Yes.
Anthony has a question. So Anthony, are you unmuted? You can ask. Okay. His question was, how would you resolve the to-go bald exception? Can a definition have an exception?
So the to-go bald just means the going bald, or the disposition to go bald is not a capability. So we don't need to handle it. It falls outside the scope of the definition. So that's a virtue. That's a feature rather than a bug. Now, the question is, how do we deal with what you might call disabilities or discapabilities or anti-capabilities? That is also a very interesting chapter in the ontology of capabilities, which began to exist today. But we haven't written that chapter yet, or chapters. All right. So capabilities, like functions, are good things. You only have a capability, you are only said to have a capability if what you have is a good thing. And the question is, good for whom? Well, for you or the community, family, church, nation, team that you belong to, for instance. And dispositions which are typically bad are just not capabilities. So going bald is typically bad. The disposition of fruit to rot is typically bad, so it's not a capability. The disposition of fruit to ripen is good, so it's a capability. And so here I address Alan's question. So he was talking about toxins. We can talk about people who say, well, John, he's crazy, he's capable of suicide. We don't mean that he has this special kind of capability that should be nurtured and cherished. We are using the phrase capable of precisely not in order to represent a capability. And what this means is that, well, we'll come to that later. So we have, the meeting is called Capabilities Human and Machine, but we need to talk about organisms more generally. So organism capabilities are such that the benefit goes, I said all of this, to the bearer or to whoever is on the side of the bearer. And all organisms have capabilities in virtue of their benefits that they accrue by either surviving or reproducing or both. So the virus gains benefits from being able to enter host organisms because it thereby enables itself to survive and reproduce. So that's a capability. And the benefits in the case of the machine go to whoever is using the machine, the owner of the factory, the owner of the machine, or whatever it might be. And that applies to artifacts in general. So if you're a patient in an intensive care unit, the intensive care unit has capabilities because you benefit. So there's always an organism in the picture when we're talking about capability. Bill?
So I guess you would say the same thing would hold for something like malignant cells, right? They have...
Malignant cells gain benefit from...
yeah, invading the surrounding
yeah,
tissue.
and I come back to that. I can deal with malignant cells.
Okay.
Yes, Alan.
They accrue to the bearer?
In which context? The patient. In the ICU, the benefits accrue to the patient and the patient's family and the patient's doctor.
So I'm thinking of a low pollution power generation method.
Yeah.
The benefits aren't to the owner of the plant. The benefits are to the wider public.
So the plant owner gets money for...
Now they do, but that wasn't always the case.
Say again?
Now they do, but...
Oh, I see. So, yeah, I think that's fine. So I would have to say, I guess, I haven't thought this through, but I have thought analogous examples through later on, that the now we'll come back to that when we deal with the other examples. So this is a speculation. All benefits depend on organisms. And if they are benefits which are like survival or reproduction, then they accrue to all organisms. And then if they are benefits which accrue to humans, then the benefits could be not benefits relevant to survival and reproduction, but they can be benefits which some ultimate consumer enjoys, benefits of pleasure or happiness or utility. Yes?
So again, I'm going to speak for Anthony.
Yeah.
Clarification, please. Human capability offers intrinsic benefit to humans, organisms more generally, where a machine capability offers extrinsic benefit to organisms?
I'm coming to that, exactly that distinction later, although not quite not quite exactly, but close. All right, now, first problem, you may have capabilities, but they don't bring benefit. So if you have a weak heart, your heart is exercising its capability, but it's making you ill, or it's preserving you in an ill state. So it's a capability, but it's not bringing benefit. And similarly, if you have a very, very weak capacity to read and write, in a society like ours, that will bring disbenefits. You'll be harmed by the absence of a capability, in other words, or by the low degree to which a capability is realized. And if you have a weak immune system, the immune system does have some capability to respond to pathogens, but it's weak, and so it brings disbenefits because the pathogens enter your body. And if you have a weak army, because they're all on drugs, or because they've been trained badly, or because they're otherwise not good soldiers, then that brings benefits to your enemy, not to you. And that means that by the definition, it should be a capability, but it seems not to be a capability to have a weak army. Alan?
So it seems that it goes to how you're defining capability. So you're not including degree. In other words, capability isn't
remember, we're only up to...
a certain rate. It's to pump blood. That's a choice.
We're only up to 0.2. We haven't reached definition 1.0 yet.
The way you're using it so far doesn't include degree.
It's coming.
And that's
It's coming.
right.
All right. So capabilities can be realized abnormally because they are of too low a degree. They are under-realized. But they can also be over-realized. So if you have the capability to run, you run in a marathon, which is too long for you, and you cause heart damage as a result. So that's over-realization of a capability. That is not a benefit. And so gaming disorder or shopping disease, shopping addiction are examples where you have a capability which, when normally realized, when realized in the normal range, is a capability, but when you over-realize it, it becomes a disease. And so this is another hypothesis, which I'm confident is true, that all capabilities are such that their realizations can be graded on a scale from 0 to positive. And in the middle range of that scale, they are bringing benefits. Now, that's other things being equal, of course. It could be that you're realizing them on the middle range, but there are also disbenefits which are associated with them for one reason or another. So it may be that the sum total is less than benefit. But still, if you just look at the realization of the capability in abstraction from whatever else is going on in your life, it brings benefits. And this brings us to definition 0.3. So we're nearly at definition 1. Neil?
So capabilities can go from 0 to some positive integer.
Yeah.
Liabilities presumably start somewhere around 0 and go to some negative integer. What's left that's a disposition that's not a capability?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
It feels like you've swallowed the class of disposition.
Probably random dispositions which bring randomness.
Yeah, the question is if we can rate all dispositions according to their benefit, but we allow both negative and positive benefit, then it seems that every disposition will be a capability.
We haven't said that we can grade all dispositions.
No, we haven't said that. So I think that the disposition of a nuclear reactor to decay or to emit radioactive particles randomly is neither positive nor negative, but it's a disposition. I wouldn't say it was 0 on the scale. All right, so then now we come to toxins and the mafia and so forth. So if you have the capability to kill without feelings of guilt, then in normal context, that would not be described as a capability. It would be described as some kind of horrible sickness. But in the mafia, it's a capability. So being a capability is dependent upon the group within which the capability is exercised. So there are deaf people who form communities in which hearing people are regarded as not really one of us. And so in such communities, being able to hear is not a capability. And if you're a distiller, then the ability, the disposition of fruit to rot is actually a capability. You want fruit which rots really well in order to make your wine or your schnapps. Now there may be clusters, and Peter will talk about clusters of dispositions and capabilities in the next talk. But it could be that in a given person, a given capability goes hand in hand with something which is a disbenefit. And I believe that that doesn't matter. It does not affect the validity of the claim because the writing poetry is still a benefit. All right, so finally, sadomasochistic implements have a capability, but the capability is to bring pain. And then here too, we just say, well, in the context or in the group to which the sadomasochistic implements are addressed, that is the benefit. So we can rank sadomasochistic implements according to the degree to which they cause exactly the right sort of pain. So now we have the definition, which is 1.0. This is the definition where you can really kill me. I don't mention, so the definition has two parts. So first of all, we define a normal case. And this means is in the normal range on the scale and is in a context which is normal for the group to which the bearer of the disposition or the user of the bearer of the disposition belong. Yes?
So fruits have two capabilities throughout. One that's good for distillers and one that's good for farming.
That's one way of putting it. I won't put it in quite that way, but I think what I say is compatible with that.
In other words, it's part of the identity criteria who benefits.
Yes. Yes. All right, so this is just a long-winded definition of human capability. Here is a long-winded definition of machine capability. And now a problem case for definition 1.0 is a beach. And this is exactly Alan's problem now. So a beach is used by a community of sunbathers. It's beneficial for whatever reason. It's a comfortable beach. It's a soft beach. Now, it's not a machine. It's not an organism. It's not an artifact. It wasn't made. Yet it seems to be such that it has a capability for a certain group. Now, if that's the case, then anything can have a capability. So a mountain can have a capability. Mars could have a capability. A mountain on Mars could have a capability, but that seems wrong. And so I would say that the only way in which a beach or a shoreline or Mars or part of Mars could have a capability is if we, human beings, have turned it into something like real estate. So we've made it part of the human world. It has value to humans. And so to say, for instance, that a shoreline is valuable, it has a capability of resisting storms, makes sense only because there are people who live inland who get benefits from that resistance of storms. And now, this looks like a problem for a BFO type of approach to ontology. So let's suppose that the shoreline is there before people come along. It already has the disposition to resist storms. The people enter, start to live inland of the shoreline, and they start to say, it's really nice living here because the shoreline resists storms. It has the capability to resist storms, but nothing has changed ontologically. The disposition to resist storms is exactly the same. It's just that because people are in the picture, it's now a capability. Alan?
That seems to conflict with the beneficiaries being part of the identity criteria, because the one and the same disposition gains capabilities in two different populations for two different reasons.
If it is part of the identity criterion, which I think it will be, we have to define the way it's part in such a way that this is not a problem.
Well, it is a problem.
Well,
it means that there's one instead of two.
So the answer is that the disposition always existed. It's one and the same. It became a capability because of something which happened on the outside.
Why not just there's a new thing?
Because there isn't a new thing. Capability is a disposition.
Well, then you have to say it's the same capability to try
No,
to create into
no.
still.
So when you become an adult, then that's not a new thing. That's just you.
Sure, but that's not the case. There's never two of me. That there are two different beneficiaries.
No,
and therefore two
no. There's only one disposition which became a capability. There were no beneficiaries before. Now there are beneficiaries. So it became a capability because of those beneficiaries. If the tax law says that you become an adult when you're 18, then for tax law purposes, you become an adult when you're 18. But that doesn't mean that you become a new person.
If there is any beneficiary.
Say again?
It's the capability if there's any beneficiary.
I think you need a little bit more than that because it could be a weird beneficiary. So somebody might enjoy eating sand or something. Anyway. So, just as a, yes?
You were talking about distinctions between roles and dispositions.
Yeah.
Roles being externally
Yeah.
granted. Isn't talking about it becoming a capability, relying on something outside of it, isn't that like weird?
Yeah, but so this is actually a related point to the point on the screen now. So when you choose to use BFO, the world does not become perfect. Because BFO constrains you in certain ways. You can only make definitions which are compatible with the definitions which are entrenched in BFO. Now, one definition which is entrenched in BFO is that only material entities can have dispositions. Software, and if dispositions are capabilities, then because software is not a material entity, it follows that software cannot have capabilities. Now that's annoying. You can deal with it just by defining a new kind of capability star, which would include not just hardware, but also software. Another way of dealing with it would be to say that software only has capabilities when it's inside some hardware, and then it's really the hardware that has the capabilities. But now to the question, why don't we just see capabilities as roles? The problem is that no role is ever identical to a disposition. And the capability of the beach is identical, if capabilities are dispositions, is identical to the disposition. So we could experiment with the idea that the beach capabilities are really roles, but then we have to give up the idea that all capabilities are disposition. All right, so capabilities can be possessed by these things: organisms and groups, artifacts, systems involving artifacts, and then things like beaches because they're part of real estate. And now, why is this useful? Well, Farhad is going to talk at great length about this kind of question. But the more people and machines are brought together in systems, cyber-physical systems, the more we're going to be needing to thread human capabilities and machine capabilities together so that they work well. And if we're going to do that, we have to have a good definition of capabilities which works for both. And there already are disciplines like capabilities engineering which do precisely that. These are the types of capabilities. I've talked about that. These are examples of specific human capabilities. So the capability to acquire further capabilities, that's what universities are all about. The capability to form groups and so forth. And when we talk about the capabilities of groups of humans, there are incredibly elaborate routines for improving capabilities of companies, for instance. So this is one example from the consulting company Deloitte. Yes?
So this is a little bit delayed, but Anthony has a question. Why cannot capability be a specialization of realizable entity where it engages in some dependent relationship with disposition and some material entity, rather than capability being a specialization of disposition?
So we will see whether the account I'm presenting here in a minute works. And if it doesn't work, that would be a backup. So as we shall see, the account I'm presenting here does have problems from a BFO point of view. All right, and then there are capabilities of members of groups. We need to understand the relation between capabilities and functions, which we don't have time for, so we'll go straight through that. This is where the issue comes in. So I'm going to propose a distinction between direct capabilities and indirect capabilities. So direct capabilities are such that their acquisition involves physical changes on the part of the bearer, which is true of all dispositions and it's true of all functions. And it's true of learned capabilities and it's true of inborn capabilities. So to acquire a digestive system with the capability of digesting food requires that your body changes physically. But then indirect capabilities are those capabilities which exist not because of some physical change in the bearer, but for some external reason. Namely, that the realization of the disposition begins to have a community to which it can offer benefits. And so the disposition is transformed into a capability because there are organisms who benefit from it. Yes?
If you want to accept these, then why can't baldness become a capability? Having no hair is really helpful if you're in a fight, martial arts.
So I guess there are some communities that you can see on the dark web where baldness is regarded as being really kinky. So yes, baldness can be a capability. I mean, the ability to go, the disposition to go bald can be regarded as a capability. All right, so now this is the summary. We have dispositions, we have capabilities and functions. They are defined in such a way that we have this. And we saw that the beach causes a problem for this, and because of that, we're not going to be able to add capability into BFO. So we will define capability in terms of BFO, but it will be outside BFO. It will be the topmost term of the capability ontology. That's my idea anyway. But because we have this hierarchy, disposition, capability, and function, and because disposition and function are already terms in BFO, it seems that it's going to be very difficult to define capability without capability being in BFO also. And this problem needs work, so I don't claim to have a final way of solving this problem. Some dispositions are capabilities because of organisms who view the dispositions as beneficial. But all dispositions which are functions independently of how any organisms view them. That's the idea. That's the basis for the proposal that function does belong in BFO because functions are part of reality independently of how we view reality, where capabilities, at least some of them, are part of reality only because people view certain dispositions as being beneficial. And then all dispositions are part of reality because they are. Yeah.
So I'm going to try and give a counterexample to all functions being capability.
Yep.
It seems like, or I imagine there's some populations that have continued because they're self-limiting.
Yeah.
The organisms die with certain regularity. Because of this, the population is able to continue because they never deplete all of their resources.
Yeah.
It seems like whatever is causing this death within the function, it's going to be selected for. Say the heart only beats so many times. So
okay, but then it's not a problem because it's giving rise to the benefit of keeping the population alive. It's survival.
Yeah, so initially it is. But then we take the same population and they're able to do really good farming and industrializing.
Yeah.
It seems like the function remains.
Yeah.
But the capability at least some point in the history is going to go away because there's no longer a benefit to the members of the population dying with this regularity because there's no longer a scarcity of resources. And so it seems like in some cases functions are going to stick around longer than capabilities.
Yep. So we would have to deal with this not at the level of general types, but at the level of instances. So you're viewing the function as extending over generations. But of course, what we have are instances of the function now, instances of the function now, instances of the function now. And it could be that at some point, those instances of a disposition which look like instances of a function and which were instances of a function even one generation ago are now no longer instances of a function. They have become, so it's like the appendix.
Yeah.
The appendix used to have a function, it doesn't anymore. And whichever part of the brain or nervous system of the organisms in question has that function, no longer has a function from that particular time where it's no longer bringing benefit. Now, we can't know when that time is. We can only know that 1,000 years later, it's no longer a function. And 2,000 years earlier, it was a function. But somewhere in the middle, it ceased to be a function.
So what are biologists going to think about that?
That's the way biologists talk about these things. And I can give you references. So, so we can never know when speciation happens. We can know after a few generations that it's happened because the organisms are not interbreedable anymore. And we can know 1,000 years before it happened, or 1,000 generations before it happened, that they were still one species, but precisely where they split, you typically cannot say. I mean, it's a very similar kind of, yes.
Sorry, counterexample for these functions. So functions are artifacts, are defined by their purpose, their design goal. So there can be only a negative design goal, which only later becomes something that's positive for somebody. So it's not. So that
for instance,
a toxin, generates a toxin that happens, Botox, which happens later to be useful in cosmetic.
Yeah, again, you have to look at it on the instance level. when Botox originally arose through evolution, it didn't have a function. When Botox is manufactured deliberately
the case
as
I'm
a
about is the design of both case artifacts.
yes.
In the first case, the original design
Yeah.
of the artifact is for some nefarious purpose.
Okay, but then for that community of nefarious people, it was bringing benefits from the start, so it already had the capability at least.
Only, you're generating a library of different materials.
Yeah.
Right? You're not sure what any of them will do. Some of them they have functions in the sense that they've been designed, right? They're artifactual, and yet only at some point can they be determined to have some benefit.
It's not enough to be designed to have a function. You have to be designed for a specific purpose. So somebody's creating a library of odd chemicals. The library has a function, but not all the chemicals produced. Yes. Being bioactive doesn't sound. Being bioactive is precisely not a function because toxins are bioactive.
Except that it's an artifact that's designed, it is functional.
So,
artifacts have functions.
So it doesn't sound to me like a very convincing function, bioactive, given that there are toxins.
Well,
so remember, function has to be something that's good for something.
The first level screening for a drug often involves just an assay as to whether it binds to some protein. That's it. That's what it's being designed for. That's what it can involve it. They can they can change the chemical structure in order to accomplish that. Only later can be determined actually whether that is beneficial.
Yeah. So a thing, an artifact has a function, not just because it's been designed, but because it has reached the point where it is produced according to that design for a purpose which the design was supporting. Now that what you're saying is pre-design. You play with molecules, you see what they do, and then you pick out some and you realize they do this, and then you design a little bit more, and then you start manufacturing. Only around then does the thing have a function. It's like speciation. You can't know until you look back later on that you've made something function.
Not typically how we define function. Function is defined by selection or design.
Yeah, but that's shorthand. That's shorthand. All right, so I guess I'm finished. So my thesis now is that indirect capabilities are outside the realm of what exists independently of how it's viewed, but direct capabilities are inside the realm of what exists independently of how it's viewed, because they always rely on functions. So I have the direct capability to digest food, really, and so that capability belongs within the realist framework of BFO because I have a digestive system which has a function to digest food. Okay, that's the end of the talk. So. I think that Ken, you had a question from the outside world.
So Anthony had the question, would not the argument for disallowing capability as a BFO category also apply to role? In both cases, their use is contextually relevant upon instance level criteria within some temporal region. That is, it seems that role is just as arbitrary as capability.
So apart from the word arbitrary, I think that is a very good question. And what that means is that I don't have an answer. Alex?
So I guess it's the same kind of point that the other guys are making, as far as if you're going to put the capability in the middle and you're going to decide whether something's a capability or not based on benefits to some group, then when you develop something like landmines, if they have one function, their function is to blow up.
Yeah.
You step on it, it blows up. That's the function. Whether it's good or bad depends, again, on the context, of course, but it seems the function doesn't change. You build a field of landmines and its function remains the same. So it has a capability in war. It ceases to have a capability in peacetime, but it still has the same function the whole time. So if you have to put every function as a subtype of capability, then I don't see how you get to say that the landmine has a function blowing up.
So the lesson that follows from many of these kinds of examples, I believe, once you're working within the BFO framework, is that having a function is something which endures a lot longer than you would suppose. So even if we outlaw landmines, even if we've had 1,000 years of glorious peace, all the landmines which are still stored away somewhere in Switzerland still have the function that they had at the beginning. And therefore, and providing they haven't rusted, then they still have the capability. So I don't think these things switch in and out quite so smoothly as your question presupposes.
Aren't they supposed to? Yeah, shouldn't they have lost the capability? You no longer.
When they rust, they can only.
Well, assuming it's preserved intact functioning.
So this is a question which that you have to resist trying to answer. So they're supposing that you have some tablets with Sumeric inscriptions on them, buried in the sand somewhere in Syria. We say they have Sumeric inscriptions on them, which are shopping lists or something. But let's suppose all people have been annihilated. The tablets are still there under the sand. Do they still have inscriptions on them, which are shopping lists? There's no good answer to that question. It's just it's a trap. Makes you do philosophy. You want to avoid such traps.
So a capability.
Hey, Barry.
Similar to Alex's. So in the landmine example, right, the capability, you said a benefit to some organism, right? So it's a benefit to the people who laid the landmine.
Yeah, of course.
It's not a benefit to the.
But that wasn't his worry. So.
So I'm worried, like, so just as long as some organism, you know,
so we need the normal.
Beneficial, then
we need we need the normal range. We need to have more than just one organism. That would be a wacko case.
No, I
don't think
the landmine case is a wacko case. Right?
If you decide that
it's
the
like
laptop,
beneficial to the people that laid them.
Yeah, people. You see, you need at least.
It's not beneficial to the other army.
And anybody who has the same DNA. Yeah, but they could have. David?
I think leading classical medicine, of course, you can have some functions that aren't good for you that haven't gotten vestigial. They might say certain levels of aggression in males are no longer good for them, proper function. Salt, the desired certain amount of salt and fat, that's a proper function, no longer good for you. Maybe menopause had a proper function, not good for you. David's case, people really speak up hypothetical self-destruct, and they're not yet vestigial. Not functioning would be good for you.
Yeah, so here again, I would say that we need to look at the instances. So 1,000 years ago, being an aggressive male was functional. It brought benefits. Now, in some communities anyway, it is no longer functional, but there is no common it. There are the instances of a certain disposition of a certain part of the body then, and then there are instances of the same disposition of the same part of the body now. But because of things which have happened in the surrounding culture, it was a function then, but it's not a function now. No, I think that they're ignoring the fact that in the 1,000 years, also the bodies of those, the bodies are differently structured. So there have been physical changes, and those physical changes are responsible for the fact that what used to be a function is now no longer a function. It's a slightly different disposition.
Hey, Barry.
But in some communities, being an aggressive male is a benefit. So
Barry, we're trying to see if Mark Caron can ask you a question. Audio.
Yeah, that would be good to test.
Hi, Barry. Can you hear me?
It didn't work.
Didn't work. So.
Okay.
So we only have 2 more minutes. So one more question.
I have a possible counterexample to claim the capabilities are good.
Yeah.
It's rather artificial, so maybe not so dangerous.
Yeah.
Suppose there is someone that can speak extremely fast.
Yeah.
Maybe she cannot pace herself.
Yeah.
In fact, she can speak so fast that nobody can understand her.
Yeah.
She dies alone.
That's fine. That's just over-realization.
Okay.
So you're outside the normal range.
You wouldn't say that she had the capability of speaking faster than anyone else.
It's not a capability. You just proved it.
All right.
Neil, we have time for one half question.
So this is more of a practical concern with putting this in BFO. And the issue is I don't know how you're going to give people good, solid advice on how to establish an appropriate reference class. This maybe goes particularly for artifacts, but also for people. I can find you a reference class. You know, they're cheap, and I can get capabilities to appear wherever I want them based on that.
You say that.
Well, you say normal, but I don't know what.
So if Bill decides that his laptop has the capability to smash people on the head, then that's Bill. He's just a weirdo. So they have to be normal, and that means more than just something created by philosophers to
so if I have the capability of speaking Klingon,
yes,
and I'm normally
there's a whole community of
and
such
I'm normally around my Klingon speakers,
yeah,
this will be a capability.
Yeah.
But then I have to go to work. And
then
and no one at work speaks Klingon, and they're annoyed by my Klingon speaking.
Yeah, but that
it's no longer.
But now you realize that you are in fact disordered because you don't know when to stop speaking Klingon.
I think we will be permanently disordered then.
Anyway, that's the end. So time's up.